Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning. This is your host, Llorraine Neithardt, and you have reached Venus Unplugged, your virtual heartbreak hotel. And what we do here is explore aspects of Venus, the archetype, Venus in our personal romantic encounters, in fairy tales, in psyche's logic. And what we've been exploring here is the world of fairy tales. Fairy tales are the structure of the collective unconscious. We have a personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious is like the world unconscious, and then our personal unconscious. So these stories are ancient, before religions, handed down. People assume that they're for children, and no, not necessarily. Modern day, it seems that they're for children, but they're moral tales, and they're tales of how, or at least this is a Jungian view, how the collective unconscious functions. So by telling these tales and also recognizing how we are living them out, we can start waking up. So what I want to start exploring is the tale of Ash Girl, which is the Grimm's version of Cinderella. Now, the Walt Disney version is the Perrault version, and that's the French one. And so our modern world, or the world of Disney, which is a fairy tale in and of itself, thinks that's Cinderella, but it's not. If you listen to the Soul's Code, and also, by the way, I put up the 16 episodes of Snow White, A Winter's Tale, on YouTube. So you have to sign up for YouTube, and then you go to Llorraine Neithardt, Venus Unplugged, and there you have 8 hours of listening to the journey of Snow White. But the journey of Ash Girl, Cinderella, there's another version also called Alaral, and that's the all kinds of fur, and that's a kind of marvelous story and fairy tale. And actually Marion Woodman, in one of her books, which I don't remember right now, she does a brilliant analysis of the journey of Alaral. But we are going to work on, we, the royal we, are going to work on Ash Girl as kind of a spiritual analysis. So we're going to bring this spirituality down to the earth, okay? And one way to interpret Ash Girl is that it's a spiritual journey of consciousness. And how does one become whole? So in this tale, we are going to look over several important hints, okay? So in the Grimm's tale, generally, it contains, okay, the girl's mother dies, and then her father remarries a woman with one or two daughters. The stepmother treats the girl poorly, confining her to the hearth and giving her impossible tasks. The girl asks her father to bring home back a certain gift, and when he goes out on his travels, the gift is usually a twig or a tree, and then Ash Girl plants it, and often on the mother's grave, the twig is watered by the girl's tears and grows into a wish-fulfilling tree. The girl is able to go to the prince's ball with clothes provided for by the tree. The girl runs away from the ball 3 times, and as we know, 3 is always, ears go up when the number 3 or 7 particularly come up in a fairy tale. Big hint. And then her shoe falls off, the golden token, and then he finds the girls, and then the sister or the sisters and the mother are punished. So that's usually what happens in the Grimm. So first and foremost, I would like to remind all of us that the mother archetype, or the feminine archetype, it's a force of nature. And it can be an energy that is life-giving or death-giving. So the feminine archetype are those two polarities. So very often in fairy tale, in this case, the stepmother, the good mother, the life-giving mother dies. Now, why does that always happen? Because when the life-giving mother, the nurturer, the protector, the one who keeps us innocent, when that dies in our life, we know we've been called, we've been chosen to go out on a journey of wholeness, of individuation. So the life-nurturing mother who's going to protect us and say, no, my darling child, you don't have to do that hard work. After all, I suffered, therefore you shouldn't. Not always a good idea. Certainly when the children are young, of course they should be protected and have a sense that there's benevolence on this earth and in the universe. But then when you start going out on your own, you have to know how to deal with evil, shadow, all this stuff. Otherwise you collapse every step of the way. So that's part of what this Cinderella tale, on a spiritual level is about. Because anybody who goes out on a spiritual quest is leaving the safety of what they think is the earth or is safe, and they start going out on this astounding quest for the unreal, the supernatural, the archetypal. And that's what the spiritual quest is about. If you're calling the divine in your life, you are calling in an archetypal force. And all archetypal forces are paradoxical. Both are true. So here we have it again, the stepmother, the good nurturing mother that keeps us protected and uninitiated, and protects us from sexuality. It protects us from knowing. It just lets us, kind of develop the basics. But in this fairy tale, as in many, the mother dies. And what replaces the beloved mother but the stepmother? So it's the dark aspect of the feminine, the shadow aspect of the feminine. Now, I want to go over shadow again because a lot of people are going, that's your shadow. They banter these terms around, and they really knew what it meant. They'd have a hell of a lot more respect. I always laugh when someone tells me, I've done the shadow work, and I think, all right, you'll learn. So now, once again, the shadow is usually what's inferior, and this is the personal shadow. It's not the collective shadow. It's not, it's like war is the collective shadow. Why do we keep on having war? Because people are working out their shadow. That's an extreme case. But the shadow is usually something that's inferior, so we don't develop it, and it can have a somewhat evil side, but it's hidden, or it's got a nasty side. It's not our Sunday best, to say the least. And people usually, they don't live out their shadow, they don't make it conscious, so they scapegoat others and project it, as the stepmother projects onto the Ash girl. Good. You can go in the kitchen and clean up the mess. Now, the kitchen is interesting because the kitchen is always the place of alchemy. When you dream of a kitchen or you dream of a bathroom, your psyche is moving towards some type of alchemical process. And the hearth in particular is the goddess Hestia. Hestia is the goddess of the hearth. That's where everybody likes to sit by the kitchen or the stove or the refrigerator. You can have a huge mansion and somehow everybody's sitting around the stove, because the goddess Hestia, her only image is the flame. It is the only goddess that has no image. And she is the essence of wisdom. She's what makes a home, a house, a home. She is what is within us. And when we feel that Hestia energy, it's a very wise and warm balance. Or if you meet somebody who's really warm-hearted, I mean, there's a Hestia energy. Things seem to flow. It doesn't make things a big hassle. All right? So here we have the stepmother. So we're starting with the loss of the mother. So we know, dun, 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 this chick is about ready to start becoming conscious and go on her search for the divine. And who comes in to initiate her but the shadow mother, who also has two stepdaughters, kind of like the fates. They're not always the best aspect of the feminine. But we need to understand something about the shadow. The more that we can integrate it, the more that we can see it, the more that we can go, in a sense, there before the grace of God go I, all right? We need the shadow because that is what keeps us down on the earth, which is where we belong, and it reminds us of our incompleteness, which also provides us with a counterpart to go on our journey. So it's very, very important to understand. It's a little salt on our tail. The shadow keeps one humble when someone is flying into inflation, particularly spiritual inflation. You know, I am spiritual. And if it gets too much or too inflated, you know, the politician or the clergy person winds up having a selfie with a hooker. The hooker being the earth, sexy, not quite into society yet, you know, still a little bit of an outcast. And that's their unconscious compensation. They don't want to deal with their shadow, so they go have that experience. And then the society goes like, what the hell did they do that for? They couldn't but they had to. It was the only way to compensate for their hubris. And it would be a lot more forgiving if they just said, whoa, I was flying so high, I was so inflated, I was in a state of hubris, which means you identify with a god or the archetype, and my shadow compensated by bringing me down to the earth. Now that's an extreme case. But why we need the shadow, and also humor is always shadow. The thing we laugh at the most is like, yeah, we all get it because we all know what it is to be human. And so that's why you see the tension of the opposites being developed. This young orphaned girl, well, she's not quite orphaned because her father's still alive. And in this case of the Ash girl, the father does play a part. In Snow White, he really doesn't. He kind of just steps in and steps out. So this is why we always have shadow aspects in fairy tale, or what they call evil in fairy tales. Evil is also live spelled backwards, so evil can take us into life. Now, I'm not talking about archetypal evil, as in the devil, although when people do not want to own their shadow, they will say, oh, the other person carries the devil, because they won't own it. So we need that shadow. keeps us on the earth. And it reminds us. So it's very important, and that's why we have it in fairy tales. We can't eliminate it. Okay? And one of the ways that, people, in our daily life, in our own life, you can pretty much tell what your shadow is. Let's say somebody comes in and they just annoy the shit out of you. It's just you want to just whip that smile off their face, okay? They haven't done anything. The fact that they exist is enough to annoy you. If you had the courage, write down a list of what is so annoying about them, and then you have an idea of what you fear your shadow is about. It takes a lot of courage. Or if we scapegoat. Scapegoating is a big shadow party. Now, if it's done conscious, we know what we're doing. Okay, I'm going to scapegoat, or I can scapegoat this aspect of myself. To set myself up to carry my shadow, because right now I don't have enough healthy, integrated consciousness to carry it. It's not right. It's not wrong. Fairy tales have no judgment. There is no sin. You either do it or you don't. The task is given, you do it or you don't. You usually get 3 opportunities. Very often in life we get 3 opportunities. And also, the 3 opportunities is also one for the conscious mind, one for the unconscious, and one for the superconscious. So things do happen in 3s. It's like, what? This is back again? It's like, yeah, one more time. By the 3rd time, you're catching on. So this is why so much shadow comes up, and as we call it, evil in fairy tales. These are teachings about how to stay human and become consciously spiritual in the human experience, not flying up to spirituality and disengaging from our humanness. So that's the amazing thing about the reason that we have shadows. And people can, like criminals, because they're living out their shadow, everything that society says, whoa, don't do that, that's like nasty. They live it out, and very often they will have a golden shadow. They will have a very noble part. And that's how they live it out, and that's also the kind of the connection with policemen and criminals. The policeman very often has a criminal shadow, and the shadow can make a very good policeman. So, in many ways, our best enemy is our shadow. So the stepmothers, Ash girls, and the sisters, kind of Ash girl's best enemy, because it irritates us into waking up. So that's what's beginning to happen there. So here we have little Ash girl, and but what I always find so interesting is why does the father or the king marry the negative feminine? What's going on in his psyche? What's happening there? But that's probably a different fairy tale. So we're looking at the Grimm's version of Ash Girl and the Cinderella. And what we are looking at, I'm going to give you a little outline here, that Cinderella's real mother dies and stepmother takes her place. Stepmother favors her own 2 daughters and consigns Cinderella to working at the hearth. So even though she's sending Cinderella to work at the hearth and to do all that tedious Saturnian work, while you're in the kitchen scrubbing and cooking and cleaning and working, you're learning. You're learning how to either do a task with absolute resistance or doing the task with a sense of the sacred. And the sense of the sacred is whatever task we have to do next, we just do it with our whole heart and our whole being and our devotion and a love that has nothing to do with the task, but just the fact that we can love while we're doing that. It's easy to love sweetness. It's hard to be scrubbing those floors and thinking about how loving everything is. But, when someone has an initiation, or we're taken into life is taking us into initiation, it starts with a bitter pill. A divorce, a life experience ends, a job ends, somehow a stepmother comes into our life, or a stepfather, or a shadow aspect, because we've repressed it so much that it shows up in our neighbor, which is interesting. So when we begin to start understanding the nature of fairy tales, that they're not supposed to have happy little endings because they're rites of passage into consciousness, it starts to make so much more sense. And so much of our love, Venus, right? Venus has definitely got a shadow. So one day, Ash Girl, Cinderella father, decides to go to a fair. He asks his two stepdaughters what they want. One requests fine clothes, while the other names pearls and jewels. He asks Ash Girl, Cinderella, and she requests that he bring the first twig that brushes against his hat on the way home. As the father is riding home, a hazel twig brushes up against his hat and knocks it off. Now, a hazel twig is magical. You use hazel twigs to do dowsing. In the Druids, the hazel twig is used for divination. It's magic. It's a wand. So just a little hint. And when he brings the twig to Cinderella, she plants it on her mother's grave and waters it daily with tears, with her own tears. So just right there, the beloved mother is buried. She's in the earth. And the tears, the holy water of the body, our own tears, is what makes that form of the beloved mother, the life-giving mother. It grows. It transforms in our own sorrow. And that's why we must have sorrow. It is a great teaching. And tears are the holy water of the body. So Cinderella, Ash Girl, waters it daily with her tears. Not just once in a while. So it means that Ash Girl is deep in the process, and anybody who's gone through any type of initiation does spend a lot of time. There is a period of just tears. You just can't avoid the tears. And then the tears of grief, whatever the outer experience of the tears, there will be tears. And then you also need to somewhere know that there is salvation. There is an awakening that's going to happen after the tears. And then the twig is growing into a tree, which will eventually be Ash Girl's salvation. And then at one point, we're going to go over all these aspects. I'm just giving you the general story. A little white bird would light on the tree, and every time she uttered a wish, the bird would throw down to her what she had wished for. And remember in Snow White, the birds? The prophecy? So the wish or the answer, I wish I knew why this person doesn't love me. And the bird will give you that answer. Okay? Or whatever we may wish for. And we all love wishes. And the energy of that is alchemically processed through the tears is the energy that creates the manifestation of the wishes, okay? So at this time, the king of the land announces a 3-day, there we go with the 3, a 3-day festival during which his son will choose a bride. There is to be a ball each evening, and the day of the first ball, the stepmother prepares her daughters to go. When Cinderella pleads to be allowed to go, the stepmother throws a dish of lentils into the ashes and says, "If you pick out the lentils within 2 hours, you may come along." Now remember in the story of Cupid and Psyche, what's the first task that Psyche has to perform? Aphrodite throws in a pile of mixed seeds and then says, "Sort them." So we always know this is a time when Ash Girl is learning to sort, but she knows she cannot do this by herself, so she has to call on nature spirits, the nature within our own selves, and as I said before, very often what separates us from shadow is people do not want to be instinctual. They want to forget that nature. They just want to be perfect or whatever they want to be. I don't know, it must be exhausting. And they disconnect from their instincts. And then they become stereotypes. So Cinderella goes to the garden and calls on the birds of heaven to help her. And they fly in, and they pick the lentils out in an hour. So you've got lentils and ashes, burned out fires, okay? And also what also comes out of the ash, that's the symbol of the ashes, is the phoenix. It burns in its own ashes and it's transformed. Especially those who have this Saturn and Scorpio, they know exactly what's going on with that one. Okay. So after they do that, and at this point the stepmother throws, when she realizes it's done in an hour, and then at this point the stepmother throws two dishes, so now we've got a number 3 again, into the ashes, and says to Cinderella she must pick them out in an hour. And again the birds are called. And this time they do the job in half an hour. Now when we were discussing the fairy tale code, that number 3, the instructions are given 3 times, or you're given 3 opportunities, and it's given exactly in the same way. She gets the 1 handful of lentils, and then she gets 2 handfuls of lentils, right? But the birds help her again, and this time they do the job in a half an hour. And though she's completed these tasks, the stepmother says that Cinderella cannot go because she has no clothes, and she leaves with her daughters for the ball. Now, because Cinderella has done the work, she's allowed to. So when you've done the work, you go to the ball. Doesn't matter what the evil mother says. So then Cinderella addresses the hazel tree with the following words: "Little tree, jingle yourself and shake yourself, scatter gold and silver over me." And a beautiful gold and silver dress appears, and off Cinderella goes to the ball. This event happens 3 days running, and the final day Cinderella is given a solid gold slipper as well. And each time she dances the whole night with the prince, but runs off before he can find out. And then the second night, the prince tracks her through the garden, but cannot find her. And then the third night, he puts pitch on the palace steps, and on her way out, Cinder leaves one of the golden slippers sticking to the pitch. Now, the prince does some work. Remember in Snow White, the guy doesn't do anything. He buys the coffin, but the servants trip and Snow White falls out. So at least this is a working prince. Okay, he knows he's got to find her. Okay, but the prince is really God. Okay, and so the next day, I got 3 seconds left. So the next day, the prince returns to her house and tries the slipper on each of the 2 sisters, and they cut off their feet to fit into the slipper. And the prince is riding away with the first and then the other, and then the hazel bush calls the prince attention to the blood on the shoe, and he goes back and finds Cinderella and marries her, while the stepsisters have their eyes pecked out by pigeons. Next week, be there or be square. Bye.
Napa know-how.
The Napa guy knows not to judge a man by his car's multicolored paint job or absence of modern gadgetry. Who cares if it's technically old enough to vote and the windows are powered by the strength of your left arm? Your monthly payment is zero, and it'll stay that way. Because with over 500,000 parts and a little Napa know-how, you can keep anything on the road. She may not be pretty, but she's all yours. That's Napa know-how.
Napa know-how.